Picture this. It's 1989, and a man from Arkansas just handed over $140 million for a football team that had gone 3-13 the year before. His own financial advisors begged him not to do it. Sports writers called it reckless. The team he bought was a laughingstock, bleeding money with no clear path back to relevance. That man was Jerry Jones. The team was the Dallas Cowboys. Today, that $140 million purchase is worth $13 billion. That's not a typo. $13 billion. A return north of 9,000%. A number that makes Apple stock, Amazon stock, even Bitcoin's best years look ordinary by comparison. So here's the question that's going to drive everything we talk about today. How does a football team turn into one of the greatest wealth-generating machines in modern history? And if you had the money, could you actually buy your way in? By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how NFL ownership works, why it's become the most bulletproof investment in professional sports, and why almost nobody who gets in ever wants to leave. Let's start with the scale of what we're talking about, because the numbers here are almost hard to process. The average NFL franchise is now worth north of $7 billion. 4 years ago, in 2022, that average sat at roughly half of that. In other words, the typical team has nearly doubled in value in under half a decade. 11 franchises are now valued above $8 billion. A year earlier, only 2 teams had crossed that line. At the very top of the list sits Dallas, valued at $13 billion, a title the Cowboys have held for 19 consecutive years. Behind them, the Los Angeles Rams at $10.5 billion, and the New York Giants just past $10 billion. To put that in perspective, the most valuable soccer club on the planet, Real Madrid, doesn't even crack the top of this list. Nothing else in global sports generates wealth at this speed. But before we get to why the money flows the way it does, we need to talk about the gate you have to walk through just to get in the room, because the NFL makes this deliberately, almost brutally difficult. Owning an NFL team isn't simply a matter of having enough cash sitting in a bank account. The league enforces a set of ownership rules that exist specifically to protect its business model, and they are stricter than almost any other major sports league in the world. Rule number 1, the controlling owner must personally hold at least 30% of the team's equity. That single rule eliminates the option of buying a team almost entirely on borrowed money or through a syndicate where no one person is truly accountable. You need real, substantial personal wealth of your own. Rule number 2, no more than 25 individual owners can be part of one team's ownership group, including that controlling owner. Rule number 3 concerns debt. A new buyer taking control of a franchise can borrow up to $1.2 billion to finance the purchase. Existing owners, meanwhile, are capped at $700 million in debt. These limits exist so that no franchise ends up buried under obligations that could destabilize it, or by extension, destabilize the league's image as a rock-solid financial institution. So what does actually walking through that gate cost in real dollars? Let's look at the 2 most recent sales, because they tell the story better than any spreadsheet could. In 2023, the Washington franchise sold for $6.05 billion, the largest sale price in North American sports history at that point. The buyer was Josh Harris, leading a group that included NBA legend Magic Johnson. Here's the part that should stop you in your tracks. The previous owner, Dan Snyder, had bought that exact same franchise back in 1999 for $750 million. 24 years later, it sold for more than 8 times that amount. And in that entire stretch, the team never won a single playoff game. Let that sink in for a moment. You can lose consistently on the field for 2.5 decades and still watch your franchise multiply in value 8-fold. That's the fundamental strangeness and the fundamental appeal of NFL ownership. A year before that, in 2022, the Denver Broncos sold for $4.65 billion to the Walton Penner family, the same family behind Walmart. 2 sales, back-to-back, both shattering records, both proof that appetite for NFL ownership was only accelerating. But that same appetite created a real problem for the league. As prices climbed into the billions, the pool of people who could actually afford to buy in kept shrinking. There are plenty of billionaires in the world, but billionaires with $5 or $6 billion in liquid cash, willing to put all of it into a single football team, are exceptionally rare. To solve this, the NFL made a historic decision in 2024. For the first time ever, it opened the door to private equity investment. But even here, the league kept tight control. A private equity firm can purchase up to 10% of a single team's equity. They get no voting rights whatsoever, a completely silent position, and they're required to hold that stake for a minimum of 6 years. That 6-year hold is a deliberate departure from how private equity normally operates, where firms typically look to exit within 3 to 5 years. The league wanted to make absolutely sure teams wouldn't get treated like short-term flips. Interestingly, while an individual owner can only be the controlling owner of one team at a time, a single private equity firm is allowed to hold minority stakes in up to 6 different franchises simultaneously, similar to a rule already in place in the NBA. Based on current valuations, that means a 10% slice of an NFL team now runs anywhere from $500 million to a full $1 billion. Now let's talk about where all this money actually comes from, because this is where the NFL separates itself from every other league on earth. The single largest revenue driver is the national media rights deal. Between 2021 and 2023, the NFL signed broadcast agreements with ESPN and ABC, CBS, Fox, NBC, Amazon Prime Video, and YouTube TV for Sunday Ticket, deals collectively worth more than $100 billion over the following decade. That enormous pool of money gets split equally across all 32 teams every single year. In 2024, each franchise received roughly $432 million from this national revenue pool alone, and that number keeps climbing. Analysts project it will surpass $800 million per team by 2035. Here's the detail that matters most. This check arrives before a single ticket is sold, before a single sponsorship is signed, before a single game is even played. Every team walks into a new season already guaranteed several $100 million in revenue. That single structural fact is why the NFL is considered the safest bet in professional sports. A massive chunk of every team's income has nothing to do with how well that team actually performs. On top of the national pool, every team also generates its own local revenue. And this is where the gap between big market and small market teams really shows up. Local revenue includes ticket sales, luxury suites, parking, concessions, and, the biggest piece of all, corporate sponsorships. Take Dallas as the clearest example. Their stadium doesn't just host football. It hosts concerts, boxing matches, even college football championship games. Premium seating alone brings the Cowboys close to $100 million a year, and sponsorship deals add more than $150 million on top of that, the highest in the entire league. Naming rights are another major piece of this puzzle. When a corporation wants its name plastered across a stadium, those agreements typically run 20 to 30 years and can be worth tens of millions of dollars annually. There's one franchise that gives us a rare, honest window into all of this, and it's worth pausing on. Of the 32 NFL teams, only the Green Bay Packers are publicly owned, meaning ordinary people can technically hold shares in the team. Because of that public structure, Green Bay is legally required to release detailed financial statements every year, something no other franchise has to do. Their most recent numbers show that roughly 60% of the team's total revenue comes directly from that national media pool. Their operating profit jumped from $60 million to nearly $84 million in a single year. And Green Bay isn't even one of the league's glamour markets. It's one of the smallest media markets in professional sports. If a small market team can pull in that kind of profit, it tells you everything about what a franchise like Dallas or New York is quietly generating behind closed doors. Now, none of this comes without expenses, and the biggest one by far is player salaries, controlled through the league's salary cap. For the 2026 season, that cap sits at $301.2 million per team, the first time in league history it's crossed the $300 million mark. Just 4 years earlier, in 2022, that number was $208 million. In other words, mandatory player spending has jumped nearly $100 million per team in just 4 seasons. Here's how that number gets calculated. Under the collective bargaining agreement between the league and the players' union, roughly 48% of the league's defined revenue is allocated directly to player salaries. That means the salary cap and league revenue are permanently locked together. As the NFL earns more, the cap rises automatically. On top of salaries, each team pays out roughly $77 million annually in player benefits, health insurance, pensions, and related costs. All told, total player-related expenses for a single team in 2026 land close to $379 million. Beyond player costs, teams also carry expenses for coaching staff, scouting departments, stadium maintenance, marketing, and administration. But here's where the NFL's model reveals its real genius. Because every team is guaranteed hundreds of millions in national revenue regardless of performance, and because the salary cap rises in lockstep with league-wide earnings, the odds of any single franchise facing real financial distress are close to zero. Compare that to leagues like Major League Baseball or the NBA, where luxury tax penalties punish high-spending franchises and create real financial risk for big-market teams. The NFL sidesteps that entirely with a hard salary cap. Every team operates within roughly the same financial boundaries, which dramatically reduces risk across the board. So, when you add it all up, what does the profit picture actually look like? The NFL's total annual revenue has now crossed $23 billion, and Commissioner Roger Goodell has set a public target of $25 to $26 billion by 2026. When Forbes calculates franchise valuations, they typically apply a multiple of 10 to 10.7 times a team's annual revenue. That multiple tells you everything about how investors view these franchises, not as sports teams, but as long-term, near-guaranteed appreciating assets, closer in behavior to prime real estate or gold than to a typical business. Of course, no investment this attractive comes completely without risk, and it would be dishonest to leave those out. The first is liquidity. On paper, a franchise worth billions sounds like instant wealth, but that value isn't easy to access. An owner can't simply sell off a slice of the team whenever they need cash. Every sale requires approval from the other 31 owners, and the pool of qualified buyers remains small. The second risk is regulatory exposure. Even though the NFL operates as a private organization, its business decisions, especially public subsidies for stadium construction, regularly draw political and public scrutiny. And the third is performance-linked risk at the local level. While the national revenue pool insulates teams from the worst outcomes, local income, ticket sales, sponsorships, suite renewals, is still tied to how a team performs on the field. A franchise that loses consistently for years can watch its local fan engagement and local revenue erode over time. And yet, even accounting for every one of those risks, NFL ownership remains one of the most coveted assets on the planet. And the reason comes down to one simple, unshakable fact: demand never goes away. As long as people keep gathering around televisions on Sunday afternoons, and as long as corporations keep wanting their brand associated with this league, NFL revenue is going to keep climbing. When Jerry Jones signed that check in 1989, nobody, not analysts, not sports writers, not even Jones himself, could have predicted his team would one day be worth $13 billion. Today, the people writing billion-dollar checks to join this league likely have no real idea where their investment will stand 25 years from now either. But history has made one thing abundantly clear. Once someone gets a seat at this table, they almost never choose to leave it. Because in the NFL, you could lose on the field for 2 decades straight and still walk away one of the biggest winners in the room.